Soft teams have to be ready at a moment's notice to go anywhere and do almost anything. And, that level of professionalism just requires high level agility, adaptability, and performance. We like to push the envelope, and we love working with a community that's looking for every single operational edge that they can get.
Hello and welcome to the McHale Report Podcast, SOF Week Show Daily edition. My name is John McHale, Group Editorial Director for the official SOF Week Show Daily and for Military Embedded Systems, and I'm also host for today's podcast. Our guest today is Michael MacFadden, CTO of Sigma Defense Systems, and today we're going to cover how enabling software mobility at the edge and AI technology will impact special operations applications. So let's get started. Michael, welcome. Can you please provide a brief description of your responsibility within Sigma Defense and your experience in the defense industry for the audience?
Sure, and thanks for having me today, John. So as the Chief Technology Officer, I'm responsible for things like research and development, innovation, and bringing technical excellence across the whole company. It's also part of my job to kind of engage with our community of customers and see where they need to be in the next 12 to 18 months and make sure that the company is there to serve their needs. I've been in the industry for about 16 years. Prior to Sigma Defense, I was the owner of a San Diego-based small business called Salute. We were a defense tech company, got acquired by Sigma in 2021, and that's how I became the CTO of Sigma Defense. And my educational background is primarily software, cyber security, and artificial intelligence, but have worked projects across hardware, networking, comms, et cetera.
Thanks. And we are here today, as I mentioned, as a preview of technology being showcased at SOF Week 2026, coming up very shortly on May 18th in Tampa. So, Michael, why is the special operations community so important to Sigma Defense Systems?
Great question. The SOF community is really a foundational part of Sigma's origin story. They were one of the first customers to really believe in us as a true technology partner. So I'd say SOF is actually in our DNA. It's kind of how we got started. But beyond that, I think we really identify with the mission and culture of the community. SOF teams have to be ready at a moment's notice to go anywhere and do almost anything. And, that level of professionalism just requires high level agility, adaptability, and performance. And delivering into that community requires innovation and a commitment to excellence that I think really resonates with our culture as well. And, we like to push the envelope, and we love working with a community that's looking for every single operational edge that they can get.
So last year, the summer, your byline graced the pages of my magazine, Military Embedded Systems, for a subject called Enabling Software Mobility at the Edge. First off, how do you define the edge, and what does software mobility mean for special operations applications?
Well, the term edge is thrown out quite a bit, and in the reality, I think it's actually all relative, right? So if you're a Google site reliability engineer in a data center, then the edge is anything that's not in your data center, actually. If you're in a talk, the edge might be some compute resources in a Humvee. And if you're sitting in the Humvee, the edge might be a mobile device that a soldier is carrying when they're dismounted. So in reality, I don't really think of the edge as a specific place. I think it's a spectrum of things like connectivity, compute resources, and logistics. And that last one, logistics, is the one that I kind of want to focus in on. I mean, we all know that the compute that you have in the cloud or a data center is different than the compute that you have on a mobile device. But those mobile devices today look a lot like those data center resources, about 10 years ago. And so that's continually changing. But the logistics of getting the software out to those more disadvantaged users is only increasing in complexity. So the complexity of modern software is just getting more and more every day. AI, ML, containers, microservices, data fabrics, like all of these buzzwords that are getting thrown out there, they're real things, but they come with a lot of complexities. And most of these technologies were designed to be deployed and operated by people with, 4-year degrees, master's degrees, 10 years of engineering experience. They were not meant to be deployed and operated by the folks that are out there doing the job of the SOF community, right? And getting those capabilities out to those warfighters is getting harder and harder as these software tools get more complex. The problem is these software tools are providing real capabilities that our warfighters need, but it's getting harder and harder to get them out there, right? And so when we think about software mobility, we think about the fact that, well, as these things are getting harder to deploy and operate, we're just not doing it. Like we put the things in the cloud, we don't put the things in the Humvees, right? And that means that when they're needed by the warfighters in a disconnected environment, they're not there. So in short, software mobility is really about the ability to be able to run software wherever you need to, whenever you need to, and we're trying to smooth out some of those logistical capabilities of doing so.
So kind of like a tactical cloud, but just in that Humvee, so they can kind of create their own mini where all that data stores. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. But with that, you think about all of the technologies and layers that come along with running a tactical cloud in the Humvee. Your networking servers, then you're putting virtualization on top of that, then you're putting a container orchestration, level on top of that, then a data fabric on top of that. And who's keeping that thing running? Who's administering it? The guy that's driving the Humvee? Probably not. And so, part of that software mobility challenge is how do we take all that goodness and all that new technology that's been developed, but make it actually bulletproof and easy to use in the field?
So we talked recently about how AI, you and I have talked, how AI is enabling coding so much faster than can ever be there before. So is that enabling software mobility? But does it actually, you mentioned before, how do we does it provide faster development as well as deployment? Or is it you're developing this code so fast, but it still takes just as much time to get it deployed? I mean, you kind of touched on that last time we spoke.
Yeah, I think the software agentic development or AI development, whatever you want to call it, is a bit of a double-edged sword. I mean, it's great as a software developer. I can produce much more sophisticated applications faster. I can respond to a warfighter's need much faster than I ever could, and that is fantastic. It also does allow me to build other supporting software systems faster that address some of these logistical issues. I can afford now within budgets that are available to develop more automation, more workflow automation that makes things easier to use in the field. But I think one of the problems is that increased pace of development is a tectonic shift in the software industry, which I don't think the DoD writ large is really positioned to respond to. As we know, software acquisition, they've been trying to push those software acquisitions through some rapid acquisition processes just over the last 5 to 10 years, just recognizing that we need to increase the pace of software deployment to the warfighters. And we're kind of almost just catching up now in 2026 to the pace at which we were able to develop software over the last 20 years. We've seen at least a 10x increase in the amount of software that the software industry can now produce using AI to develop software. And so just as the DoD is just now catching up to how we were able to deliver software in, say, 2011, right? Well, now we just 10x'd or more that. And so the problem there is there just isn't a catcher's mitt on the DoD side or the Department of War side to be able to funnel that through. When somebody from the special operations community comes to me and says, "Hey, I've got this really novel problem. There's some data I need to integrate or some AI detection that I need to do," and we can respond in 2 weeks and develop them a solution, but then it takes 9 months to get a contract in place, and then we've got to go through, training and deployment, and then it takes another 9 months to actually get it, out to the field. That looks there's a lot of disparity there, right? Like something that takes me 2 weeks to develop to solve a real emerging problem that then can take a year to get out to the field, right? And so I think that's where the emergence of this AI development workflow that's really going to accelerate the pace at which software can be developed is going to put a lot of pressure on how we acquire and then field and deploy software.
And once it's out there, it takes a year and a half to go. And that fast moving AI development is probably already 2 or 3 generations ahead by the time that original one was fielded. So you're playing catch up. It almost reminds me of the whole takes so long for these defense platforms to get any commercial technology into the field. It's still going on.
Yeah, that's another great point. Just speaking as a software nerd, if I go back to September of 2025, right? The agentic coding models, these large language models that enable software developers to develop software very quickly, they were okay, but not great. Between OpenAI and Anthropic, in about October to November of 2025, they both released some pretty significant model updates that really changed the game. And we've now been through 3 iterations of those models since November of 2025. The models that we have today are exponentially more capable than the models that we had in September of 2025. I've never seen something move so fast. And so if we take the fact that those same models are powering other AI capabilities that support other things like natural language processing, AI translation, so I can be listening on a radio to Russian communication and hear that translated in real time, object tracking, object detection, acoustic detection, all of these models are now advancing so quickly. And the way I think about it is if you went back and said, well, Michael, you now have to use that coding model that was available in September, 2025, I would be at a significant disadvantage from somebody else who was able to use a model that was released last month, right? And that pace of model training is permeating the industry. And so if we put a model out there for our warfighters that is 9, 12 months old when it gets out there, and then let it sit there for another 12 months before we update it, they're at a significant disadvantage from any adversary that's able to field a model that was developed 2 weeks ago, right? And so again, if we kind of go back to that software mobility concept, we just have to do better.
Makes me think of the examples in Ukraine, how they're fielding upgraded solutions for autonomous systems for drones much faster than we would go through in our procurement process. But this is even light years faster than what AI was happening with software development. The capability is the immediate capability is not getting to the warfighter. So how do you solve that? How do you solve that? Do you have to get AI on the other end to review the contracts? Or I mean,
yeah, well,
there's a bureaucracy there, right? So.
Yeah, you raise a good point. If we look at a confluence of things that are happening, we've got compute density, and I'll answer the acquisition question, but you raise a really good point that I want to touch on, which is if you look at the compute density of, the kind of computing power that you can get in a mobile device, and those chips are available for other integrations. You look at things like additive manufacturing, where I can start to 3D, print parts, and then you layer on top of that AI, right? I can build a really sophisticated autonomous vehicle really cheaply and really quickly, and I can adapt it for something in a matter of weeks. When a new battlefield situation arises, I can literally build a new drone with a sophisticated processing board on it, running sophisticated AI to do something that it could not do 2 weeks ago. And we can do that really fast. And that's what we're seeing in Ukraine and some of the conflicts that are going on in the Gulf right now, is these rapid development of cheap, special purpose, but very effective assets, right? And so we're seeing a level of innovation there that we just haven't seen before, and it's becoming accessible to almost everybody, right? It's not high-tier nation states only that can do this kind of stuff now, right? It's militias, for example.
Point.
And so wrapping that back around to your acquisition question, right? Like there are technical challenges here to doing this and making these systems easy to use at the edge, but that acquisition piece really is important. And I think one of the things that I like about the soft community is that they typically do lean a bit forward in that regard. And we're also seeing the department as a whole start to shift maybe away from some of the traditional FAR-based contracts to things like OTAs, other transaction agreements, prototypes, commercial solution offering type vehicles. And I think that is partially in response to this very topic, right? We have to find other ways to acquire this technology faster. And so we have to pair the acquisition cadence up with sort of the ability to then pragmatically deal with the logistics of pushing stuff out to the edge that quickly.
Yeah, they also have SoftWorks, but along with the Air Force Works, where they test out new technologies and stuff. So they are definitely moving toward that. And we were talking earlier about tactical at the edge. So for tactical at the edge applications like special forces, you guys offer something called the Aries family. How does that solution impacts, SOF operators? And can you share any examples of where it's been used or applied?
Sure. So, Aries is a very cool capability. And so some examples, really what that capability is about is rapidly integrating and networking enabling sensors. And so, for example, you take a very high resolution FLIR camera. Well, that just has a USB cable coming out of the end of it, right? And so you can plug that into our Neos device, and suddenly that camera becomes network enabled. And what we do with that is we build something, for example, called like an Overwatch kit, and it's the cameras, the Neos integration box, a battery, maybe a tactical radio, right? And if I'm a SOF operator, maybe I'm operating in an urban area, I can go take that, put that on a rooftop, have it doing an overwatch, of my area. I can do AI motion detection, object detection on that device, and it's going to ping my Android, phone if it sees anything I need to be worried about, right? And so it's a very novel capability where you can rapidly integrate these and network enable sensors that you wouldn't be able to. Another great example is we're seeing just across the board a resurgence of small and medium-sized UASs. So drones that can be carried and then launched in the field. Most of these just go from the drone back down to some mini little control station, and so you got one guy who can see that video. Nobody else can see that video, right? It's just coming down to his handheld, right? And so that same capability, we can take a feed out of that small form factor drone, plug it into the Neos box, and suddenly that drone becomes network enabled. Now I can share it with the other members of my team. I can share it with other teams in the same area. I can get it back to the TOC so commanders can see what's going on. And so really that kind of pairs really well with our software mobility concept, because the sister concept there is data mobility. We want to be able to get both software wherever it needs to go, but also data where it needs to go, right? And so we can push the software and the AIML towards the edge, and then we can get the data back from the edge. So you put those two things together, and I think we can make a real difference for the community.
You're talking about the data mobility. It reminds me back to the article again, where you also were talking about how this all feeds into the CJAD-C2 concept, what combined joint all-domain command and control, because I know every single acronym. I can spell it out. But how do special operations fit into CJAD-C2, or is that relevant to this conversation?
It totally is, and I think where it comes down to is these operators work even in the same mission in vastly different environments. Sometimes they're connected, sometimes they're not connected, right? And I think that we have built systems that sort of just assume one thing or the other, right? They're either built to be connected and then they fall down when you go disconnected, or they're sort of assumed to be disconnected, and so then when you are connected, they don't take advantage of sharing that data, right? Like that siloed drone that just goes from the air down to one human. And so when we think about CJAD-C2, we think about wanting to maximize CJAD-C2 in whatever connectivity state you find yourself in, right? So if I can, maybe I don't have enough bandwidth to send a full motion video feed back, over whatever comms I have, but if I can now push that AI detection algorithm out to the camera, right? It's doing that AI there, and only when it sees something of interest is it going to take a snapshot of that object, send that one frame back over, the disadvantaged link, and now suddenly the commander knows, oh, there's something there that I need to pay attention to. Versus now, when we just don't send the video at all because we can't get the software out there to do the AI detection at the edge, right? And so, what we kind of think about is getting as much CJAD-C2 as the situation affords, and then degrading gracefully is kind of what we're going after.
And what other solutions are you offering at SOF Week in addition to Aries and stuff you're doing with CJAD-C2?
So I think that kind of puts a nice bow on it. So some of the things that you'd see if you stop by to the Sigma's booth at SOF Week, you're going to see our Olympus ecosystem, which is a series, and that would include the Aries defense capabilities. It's a set of edge compute, comms, AI/ML at the edge, data fabric. So it's basically an ecosystem that allows you to move software from, say, cloud to a forward operating base out to a tactical edge kit. So that fits in really well with the conversation here. We have several new sort of ISR and force protection capabilities that are launching in those Aries solutions. We're going to be demonstrating a lot of these software mobility concepts, and a lot of what that's focused on is we've been building a growing partner ecosystem of AI/ML providers, and we're sort of showing how we can get that from cloud to an edge kit all the way to a soldier-worn, compute device, and then get data moving, back and forth between them. So it really is kind of showing that end-to-end flexible JADC2 architecture.
So you talked about this earlier about how the SOF community can kind of go test technologies out more quickly than some other groups, and they often call themselves as they're the tip of the spear. They're the first ones into combat, and I think we both agree they're the first. They also refers to how they're sometimes the first to deploy and experiment with technology. And you talked about how you found that to be the case. What have you learned by working directly with SOF operators and in your technology development?
Great question. What we really like about the SOF community is they have a show me mentality. And so a lot of the other services, we spend a lot of time writing white papers, doing office calls, doing briefings, responding to 60-page technical volume type RFPs. And with the SOF community, they usually just ask us to show up and prove it. And what's great about that is, it just fits in with our culture of rapid innovation. But the other great thing is they'll let you crawl around in the mud with them if you want, right? And so you can go take what you think is a good solution to a problem that they have and go kick the tires on it directly with the operators. When we develop solutions for other services, it sometimes is hard to get that direct kind of access to the end user. You've got multiple layers of acquisition infrastructure between you and the actual person that's going to use the system. And in the SOF community, you get right to the chief warrant officer or whoever it is that's going to be using the capability and get some really direct feedback. And so I think some of the things that we've learned boil down to, hey man, it's just got to work, right? You can come in and talk about all the cool algorithms you have and the new compute chassis you have and this new radio that you have and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, the dang thing's just got to work. And it's got to work when it's raining, and you've got gloves on, and so you're trying to, do something on this touch screen, and your buttons are too small, and I can't get the thing. Like, that is the kind of stuff that you just don't learn from some of the other services when you're doing a paper exercise. But with the SOF community, you just get right in there, and they'll like I said, they'll let you roll around in the mud with them and get as dirty as you want. And I think you get a level of insight into the real problem that you're trying to solve for those users that you just don't get anywhere else.
So what has you most excited about the show, about SOF Week?
A couple of things. I think the thing that excites me the most is getting ideas for new problems to solve. When we put out new solutions and set some of our prototypes on the table, a lot of the feedback that we get from the users is, that's cool, but it would be better if ... right? And those conversations that we have are invaluable. A lot of our prototyping and our new capability communications is really to get the ideas flowing, to stimulate what the art of the possible is, and then get that feedback from the community. And so just being an environment where there are just a ton of people with a ton of different, perspectives, a ton of different missions that they're going to prosecute, we get a lot of great ideas come out of SOF Week for what we want to go build next. It's also interesting to see what other companies are innovating. We're a highly collaborative company. When we build solutions, to a degree, we don't care if it's a Sigma brand, logo on a piece of software or a radio or a compute box. we just want the best stuff to put together. And so, we really like the opportunity to see what other companies are innovating. Quite frankly, we talk to some of the customers as they come by our booths. Hey, what else have you seen here today that really gets you excited? And then we wander over and have those conversations with those companies and figure out how we can put some solutions together. So I think those are probably the things I'm excited about the most.
Well, that brings us right to the end of our broadcast. Thanks for speaking today, Michael. I enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot, and be sure to check out Sigma Defense Systems at booth 645 at SOF Week in Tampa, starting on May 18th. And thank all of you for listening to today's SOF Week Show Daily version of the McHale Report Podcast. Look forward to seeing you on future broadcasts.